in our next exercise, you are going to be modifying a customer form. And before we get into the modifications on that, I'm going to quick explain regular expressions and the pattern attribute, because you're going to be using some very simple regular expressions to do basic validation in the form. And regular expressions are used in a variety of programming languages, and in forms, they're used to validate input. And for HTML forms, we're using the pattern attribute. So we have pattern equals, and then in double quotes, you're giving it the regular expression. So if you wanted it to check for digits, you have to have a left bracket 0 through 9 and a right bracket. So basically that is telling the browser, as long as they key in numbers 0 through 9, it's valid. Now, if you want them to only key in a certain number of digits, then after the brackets that have the 0 to 9, you have to have curly braces, and you have to have a number inside the curly braces, and that number represents the maximum number of digits. Okay, so here we're limiting them to 3 digits, and here we're limiting to 10. As far as text goes, if you want lowercase a to z, you put A-C in lowercase letters inside the brackets. If you want uppercase, it's an uppercase A dash uppercase Z. If you want to limit the number of letters in curly braces after the brackets, you put in the number you want to use to limit. So if you were going to have them type, 3 initials, you might want to limit it to 3, and you might want those initials to be uppercase. Okay, so this pattern would make sense. There are other examples at the W3 Schools site. This is one of them. So if you're checking out a URL and you want to make sure it begins with HTTP or HTTPS, okay, this would be the pattern that you would use. And this website has a lot of other patterns, much more complicated. In our particular form, we are just going to use very simple number patterns. So that being said, we are going to download the customer form to our Lesson 8 folder. And we are going to download the Running Club graphic to our media folder. And I have entered pretty much all of the CSS for you. I've entered some headings. I've entered the form, opening and closing form, and I've entered the H1 for the Running Club membership. You get to enter all of the field set stuff. And this is the one where we have field set is the child element, and we have 3 of them. Okay, so there's 3 children in this. And form is the parent. So I'm going to go ahead and open this so you can kind of see it. It's this one. Okay, so you can see I'm bringing in a font from Google. We're using that API here. And Nixie 1 is the font. And then here I've got a background graphic. The form is the parent. That's where display flex is. We are organizing by column, kind of the same as the other form that we just did. Got some styling here for H1. We have a legend. This is the text that is displayed in the field set group. Then we have our field set group. This is where we are specifying the child element. We're also saying that the maximum width for the field set will be 600. That is the maximum. Okay, it can be smaller than that. And for the labels, this is how we are defining the labels. They are going to have a width of 150. Okay, that is the space that that label text will occupy, and it will be right aligned. And you pretty much have to give the labels a width, otherwise it's impossible to get them to align correctly. And then you'll notice there's some classes. We have an input button class, we have a form entry class, and a class that I've called money. So the input button class is going to be used on the buttons that are at the bottom of the form. The form entry class is going to be used on the input tags, the various tags. And it's basically specifying a width for all of those tags and a font size, and that we're going to left align the text. So that's the entry areas that people are going to be typing in. And then for the payment section, we're not going to be using form entry, we're going to be using money. And the width of those is going to be a little bit wider. Okay, so these are separate for most of the entry areas. We're going to be using 200, but for the areas that deal with money, where they put in the credit card and their full name and all of that fun stuff, we're making them a little bit wider. And then you can see down here in the HTML, right below the running club membership is where you need to start keying in all of that fun data. So I'm going to pause while I get the data in here, and then we'll kind of quickly run through what it's doing. So starting kind of from the top, we said that form is the parent, or it's the container in this flex box layout, and the field set tags are the children or the items. We have 3 of them. In the first field set group, this is where we have the personal details. And for this, you'll see we have first name as a label. And we kind of omitted the for statement in here, so you could see both ways of doing it. And so we have this as just a plain label. For input, we have the class as form entry, so it's going to pull the width of 200, font size of 14. It's going to pull this when it actually is creating the entry area. We have the ID and name attributes set, type as text. We have a placeholder, okay, which is basically giving them a prompt. This is required and autofocus is on. Then we have last name set up kind of similar. We have date of birth, and now we are using one of those fun new elements, date. And date works very different in the different browsers, so we'll take a look at that. Then we have email, and again, we're using one of the new HTML5 types, and we have a little prompt here, and we're saying this is required as well. Then we're asking them for a URL. And we are using the URL type. And we're giving them a little prompt how to enter that. Then we have a telephone entry. We're using the type of telephone, giving them a little prompt. And then we want to know their shoe size. This is a running club, okay? So shoe size and shoes are important to runners. So we want to know what their shoe size is, and we are going to use a slider for this. Actually, no, we're using a spin box. I lied. So the type is number. We're giving it a minimum and a maximum and a step. Because if you remember, shoe sizes are measured in halves. So we're starting at size 5, going up to size 18, and I cannot imagine anybody that has a size 18 shoe. And each increment is going to be a half. Default value is 9. And we're going to change the width here because this class sets the width at 200 and we don't need it that wide for a shoe size. So we're kind of overriding it here and setting the width at 50. Skill level. This is where the slider is located. So we have the type set to range, and when you use that, you get a slider. We are setting a minimum and a maximum value. And we're setting the value at 0, which is basically going to be 1 because 1 was our minimum. So let's save this. And we're going to go take a look at just the personal detail section. Okay, so they have to fill in first and last name. They have to fill in date. And you can see that we're telling them kind of here how to do it, but Firefox really isn't handling date all that well. Okay, and then we've got email, URL, the phone. This should be going up or down by half sizes, and it is. And then we have the skill level. So let's take a look at this in Edge. Okay, so this is pretty much the same, but when we get to date, date is actually handled pretty darn awesome in Edge. Okay, so you can actually select exactly what you want and enter it. And let's pull this up over here in Chrome, because Chrome also handles the date well, because you can actually pick the calendar date, or you can use the little spin arrows here and adjust each little section. So it's very flexible in Chrome, and Edge, not so great in Firefox. Okay, and then you'll also want to see what it does in Opera and Safari as well. Okay, the slider shouldn't be any different. The shoe size shouldn't be different. Where I noticed the difference was in date. Now let's go back over here. So we looked through the first child item. So let's go down here to our next one, which is billing address. So for the address, we're just using a text area box. Would I normally use that for address? Maybe not, but I want you guys to practice using a text area box. So we are going to enter the address that way. It's more of a free form address when we have the text box. And you'll notice that we are requiring the address. We did kind of override the style here because with a text area box, we do need it to be a little bit wider and a little bit taller. Okay, because they're going to be entering the address in there. You'll notice that we have the zip code as well. We're just entering that as text. And then we're having them pick a country, and for this we are using a data list. So the list has country names specified. That is the ID that we've given it in the data list. Okay? And again, the nice thing about using a data list is that whatever you have for the value is what they see. And you'll notice that I did add an option for label in here. Do you have to add a label? Absolutely not. Okay? You do need to have a value. You do not need to have a label. That is optional. Okay, so that is our second section, so let's take a look at that. So we have a free form address, postcode, postal code, and then we can pick the country from our data list. And it pretty much works the same in these different browsers. Okay, this one is not different. This little section. Okay, the font got a little fun here, but other than that, there really isn't any difference. Okay, we'll take a quick look at card details. So this is our third child or item in our flex box. And we are displaying the options or the radio buttons in line to get everything to line up properly. And then for the card information, we're basically using a text input box for the name. And we're giving them a little prompt name as it appears on your card. We are using the money class for this because we wanted the entry areas wider. And then for the card number, the type is number, and we are using a pattern here. Okay, for validation, that means that they have to use all numbers for the card number, which kind of makes sense. The security code, that also needs to be a number, and it should be 3 digits. So we have a pattern for that. And we are giving them a prompt, 3 digits on the back of the card. And then for the expiration date, the type is a date. And all of this money information is required. Okay, then at the very bottom, that is where we have our buttons, and we are using the button class to style those. And let's take a look. Okay, so we've got the card detail group, and then we've got our buttons at the bottom. And if you wanted to test this, and this is kind of a lengthy one to test. I don't think that's required. Freddie Flintstone. For the card number, it had to be numeric. And if you try to type in, actually E is considered numeric for scientific notation, but if you try to key in other letters, it won't let you. Letters that it interprets as numbers like E's, it is allowing those, just so you know. And then here we said the security code needed to be 3 digits, so I'm just going to try keying in 2. Now let me submit this. I'm surprised that it allowed that. So obviously not a perfect system. Let me make sure it didn't take anything else. Interesting. So pattern apparently isn't working that well, at least in Chrome. Let me see how it works over here. Okay, that was required. Oh, look at that. This is allowing me to key in letters. So obviously this is not a perfect system. Let me do 1 there. Oh, it's coming back because we said phone was required. Let's see. So it is catching some of this. Okay, but as far as those pattern match things, it's not catching all of that. Let's see how this one does. So I'm basically making up stuff, which I'm actually fairly good at. You can see spin arrows on the shoe size are not working in this browser. Let's leave some of this required stuff out and see what it does. Okay, well, that's actually a pretty good message that Chrome is giving. And it's pretty much ignoring the pattern. Why am I not surprised? Okay, so. Yep, so a lot of them ignored the pattern. However, I would keep that pattern in because eventually I do believe that they will recognize them and use them. Okay, a lot of these HTML5 things are new and they are being slowly implemented. Okay, so this is what you need to do for your second form.